Start this session in immersive storytelling. I'm Biswas. I'm the India correspondent with the BBC, and I have a panel with me. To begin with, how many people in the audience are aware of what immersive storytelling is? Can you raise your hands? Okay, I think I need to kind of give a little brief then. The immersive storytelling is essentially being described as journalism's next frontier. Filmmakers and gaming enthusiasts have been experimenting with the technology for a long time, and journalists have been starting to use it for the last 3-4 years or so. Essentially comprises, just to give a little idea, of two elements, augmented reality and virtual reality. Augmented reality essentially adds digital elements to a live view, examples would include like Snapchat lenses or the game Pokemon Go. And when we talk about virtual reality, it's a complete immersion experience which shuts out the physical world in a sense. So to give you an analogy, in a virtual reality situation, you can swim with the sharks, and in an augmented reality situation, you can actually watch a shark pop out of your business card, for example. Immersive storytelling has immense possibilities. You can, with virtual reality, you can get into, it's a very visceral form of storytelling. You can get around space. You can visit a virtual crime scene. You can have 360-degree videos of natural calamities, and journeys to spectacular vistas and so on. So in any case, it's one of the most exciting things in the media today, and it's a very challenging time for people in it. So with me on the panel today is Tom Millen, who's a director of Crossover Labs, which is specializing in production and exhibition of immersive content, and also arranging cross-media training around the world. He's curated a number of immersive and interactive exhibitions for festivals worldwide, like CPH Docs and the Bergen International Film Festival and the Sheffield Doc Fest, among others. He also worked on the BBC's first original VR commission, which was Easter Rising, Voice of a Rebel, which I strongly recommend, which is part documentary, part virtual theater, and it's quite an experience. And sitting next to Tom is Chintan, who is one of India's most internationally acclaimed musicians. He was the co-founder of the band Parikrama. I looked up one of his profiles, and I think the Parikrama site, and it says he's a born musician, he's a wannabe drummer, sometime producer, and also a bass guitarist. So he's possibly the most interesting guy among us. And he also had a very powerful Pink Floyd tribute show to people who listen to Pink Floyd called Think Floyd. And next to Chintan is my colleague in the BBC, Vikas Pandey, who is the editor of Video and Innovation. He's a self-taught VR filmmaker himself. He's produced 3 award-winning document VR films for BBC India. And he straddles a lot of world, digital news, where we work together, videos, text, and now VR. He's a great example of how journalists can go beyond what they start doing in the first place. To start the panel, I would like to ask this question that the first time when you made a piece of immersive media, I'll start with Tom. How did it come about, and what were your experiences like when you first got into immersive media? If you can tell us a little bit of where you came from, and when you went into doing immersive media for the first time, what were the challenges, and did you have any trepidations about it?
Sure. So I think the first time I ever came into contact with immersive media, specifically virtual reality, I was curating the interactive exhibition at Sheffield Doc Fest, which is one of the biggest documentary festivals in Europe. and we got a couple of applications in, some submissions from a couple of bonkers people called Oscar Raby and Noli de la Pena. And we said, they said, we've got these virtual reality stories, we'd love to set them up at the festival. And we said, no idea what that is, but sure, like, come along, as long as you bring all the kit, we'll give you some space. And they rocked up with handmade headsets that they basically built in their garage. And now Noni's gone on to, she's known as the godmother of VR in the industry now. And it was just like the most popular thing, and I knew from that moment that everything that we were doing at Sheffield Dockfest at the time was going to change, because this virtual reality thing had landed without us even expecting it, and it really did just completely take off after that.
And how long ago was this? Like how many years ago? And what was your first project? Do you remember?
So I think that was 5 or 6 years ago when that happened, and then the first project we made was, as you mentioned, Easter Rising, Voice of a Rebel. And that came about because my partner in Crossover Labs, Mark Atkin, was actually in a pub watching traditionally very English. He was in a pub watching this band play, and he got chatting to a guy about kind of what we do and that we're interested in immersive. And this guy said, I've got this old tape that my father left me about his experiences of the Easter Rising in 1916. And if you don't know, the Easter Rising was basically, it was a rebellion in Ireland that basically led on, created the Republican movement in Ireland. And Mark was like, that we have to make this. We have to illustrate this tape and bring it so it's really an audio journey that's completely augmented visually, and you're put in the shoes of this one man who and follow his experiences throughout the couple of days that he took part in a momentous event.
Okay, and Chintan, I want to ask you, because you've been a performing musician, you've produced albums, you've done film scores, you've been a technical consultant to art festivals. How did you cope with, how did you kind of stumble onto immersive storytelling and your first VR project, doing spatial sound design? How different was it, and how did you come across it?
So my journey has been kind of on the bleeding edge or the cutting edge of technology. I've always been curious. One thing I'd like to, I've been here watching all the talks going on since yesterday. Journalism is a very serious topic. All the panels that have been spoken about, all the topics that we've discussed are very serious, and we're talking about issues in society and economics and wars. But there is one side of journalism and one side of storytelling which is having fun, which is kind of overlooked. I mean, so for me, this journey has been about having fun in whatever I do, and by experimenting with technologies, by experimenting with new things, by adopting new forms, it stays fun. I mean, every 2 years, 3 years, I have to upgrade, I have to upskill, I have to learn new thing. So for me, it's just a lot of engagement, a lot of new thing. So I come back to that. So it allows me a lot of fun, and that's how I kind of got into, first we got into mobile technologies, web technologies, try to dabble with them. Then came the Kinect, which was a gaming system, but that the Kinect was like really powerful tool in the hands of developers. It allowed you to map rooms, 3D structures, gestures, interactive control. And from there, within the last 5 or 6 years, from the appearance of this technology, suddenly all of this technology is available on your phones, in your devices. It's in your house. I mean, 10 years ago, we couldn't have even thought, even predicted that all this technology was like really sci-fi. You could only see it on the screen. Nobody had experienced it. Within the last 6-8 years, all this technology has arrived at our doorsteps, and now we are talking about telling new stories through this medium. Mm-hmm. So that's what's kind of like kept me going and inquisitive. It's really a very rapidly developing technology and an art form and an expression style. I can't wait for the next big thing.
Has it helped you get a handle on how journalism is done and,
Yes, so I have been dabbling with, because I've been a filmmaker, I've worked in television channels, I come from a background of radio, my parents, my cousins, so journalism and storytelling has been a part of my journey in that respect, and then working with a lot of studios. So because we develop all these technologies and we're working with these technologies, a lot of studios who want to dabble in these technologies, a lot of channels, a lot of production houses who don't have the systems, then they approach us to kind of bring them to life, or they come with an idea, and then we figure out a way to express it package it in the right technology.
And because I know your career trajectory, and you kind of have a background in news, and you've spent a lot of years basically honing your skills in traditional journalism skills in print and then digital and writing and pictures, and I've seen you kind of moving towards immersive storytelling. How did that come across? How did that kind of crossover come across? And how do you manage to straddle all these worlds of text, pictures, traditional forms of legacy journalism, and something which is so cutting edge?
So how many of you are journalism students here? Quite a lot. Right, so you will relate with this story. So as Soutik said, I was happy doing my tech stories and pictures, and in 2017 I was given some money to do something different. By that time I'd heard about virtual reality. I knew basics. And I came across the story of two little girls who live in the Himalayas in a village near Gangotri, and they spend 6-7 hours walking to go to school, and that really touched me. Then I thought, okay, we'll do a documentary, and I was thinking, what if I can take audiences, to that journey along with them? And that's where I thought about doing it in VR, because there's no other powerful medium. So when you put the headset on, you're cut off from your reality. That's why it's called virtual reality. And when you watch that film, you go along on a journey with them. And that I thought was very, very powerful way of storytelling. So that's how it started. Then one thing led to another. And those films are being showed here. So after this session, if you're interested, go and watch these films. You'll have a better understanding of what we're talking about.
And Tim, how do you, when you come across a project, a VR project, how do you decide that which are the stories that can be made in this format? What kind of stories actually lend themselves best to this format? Because when you're looking at journalism, there are stories and stories and stories. It's not filmmaking where you're conjuring up a story and you're putting it out. But in journalism, you're kind of picking up real things on the ground. So some of the stories might not work, and some of the stories lend themselves more to this medium. So could you tell us about stories that actually lend themselves to immersive storytelling more than others?
Yeah, so the first kind of story that I say that lends itself very well to virtual reality especially, is we've already mentioned it twice, is walking in somebody else's shoes, putting yourself in with another character or in the position of another character to witness what their experiences were or are at one time. Another thing that always works really well is transporting you to somewhere that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to go. So that might be onto the surface of Mars, or it might be into the middle of a war zone, or it could even shrink you down to the size of a blood cell so you could go inside the body and see how drug-resistant bacteria develop. Stories that another thing is often, again, with our film Easter Rising, there's been quite a lot of other VR documentaries that have also been based on archive audio. It's something that seems to work really well. Something that a lot of people say, especially I think the first person I heard say this was Francesca Panetta at The Guardian. She said that when you're creating a virtual reality story, the first thing you have to do is make a really good radio documentary or make a really good radio play, because the audio is there first. And that's what people are really listening to, and you can't overdo it with the kind of visuals and things.
Okay. So, Chintan, do you believe picking up on what he said, Tim said, that, the audio kind of, sometimes a radio play would be a good kind of template for a documentary. So that brings me to the subject of a sound as a Kickstarter, in a sense, for a good immersive storytelling experience, if you can.
So, couple of things to this. The audio edit is pretty much the starting point for traditional cinema as well. At least your blocking of dialogues, your blocking of the flow of the story is often done with audio first. The script is written like in a film. A script is written and the script is recorded in a rough form, or a voiceover is recorded in a rough form or in the final form, and then the visuals are kind of laid to match that. Now, with immersive storytelling, with virtual reality filmmaking, a lot of those traditional methods of producing a film or producing content change. Firstly, you don't have the director's prerogative or the cameraman's perspective, where the cameraman decides where you're looking. You decide where you're looking. You can do a lot of make-believe in traditional 2D storytelling. You could have sets, you could have locations, you could fake locations, you could make one location look like another location. Virtual reality is not about that. It's about being there. We do conjure up locations through CGI. We can computer-generated images are really realistic these days. Gaming engines, Unreal, Unity, they give you an amazing, realistic kind of an environment. So all that is done, but still, I mean, once the camera is put on there, once the camera is rolling, you don't cut fast. You don't go from one scene to the other. If you're in a room, you'll stay in this room till there is a really good reason to get out of the room. So given that, the method changes, the approach changes, and so the subject changes. And now coming to the audio, so we've talked about experiencing things, we've talked about looking at things, we've talked about being in a place, but actually the biggest cues that we get of where we are from our ears. We judge our environment by the ear. If you're in a quiet room, you feel different. If you're in a noisy place, you feel different. Whether your eyes are shut, your brain's constantly taking cues from your surroundings and feeding you that information. So now this technology, the funny thing is that this technology has existed with us since the 1900s, which is the 18th century. Oh, sorry, I'm getting the other way around. But this technology has existed in the form of binaural audio. So we've heard of, we've all seen speakers, we've all dealt with music. You have that single speaker, which is now the dock. Then you have the stereo speakers, which is two speakers sending out a left-right signal. I'm just just a small technical segue here. Now, along with the stereo left-right, there's been something called a binaural system, which has existed, but we didn't have any use for it. It has been used in some musical recordings, in some films. So what binaural does is it sends direct signals, left-right, individual signals to your ears, and the brain does the rest of the calculation. The brain creates the sonic space because it's basically premised on the way the human head receives and perceives audio. Audio is existing, audio sound waves exist in a room, they come towards you, they travel towards you, you have two ears, and then you have these ear canals which send the signal up to the brain. Now the brain does the rest of the decoding. So in immersive cinema, we have the power of using this binaural decoding because you're invariably listening to, you're watching it on a headset or you got headphones on. So we are able to control the kind of sound that's going to your head. And now the interesting part about this new technology is, this old technology which has suddenly got a new life, is another word called ambisonics. So what ambisonics does as opposed to stereo audio, so we have stereo audio, we have surround audio, like movies have 5.1 surround, 6.1 surround, 7.1 surround. Now in ambisonics, we have similarly 5.1 means 6 channels of audio. LR, stereo means 2 channels of audio, left and right. In ambisonics, you can have 4, 6, 9, 16, as many channels of audio to create a 360 sphere around you of the sound. And based on where you're looking, based on where your device is looking. Like if you're wearing a headset, where the headset is, because the headset has an accelerometer, it's got a gyroscope, it knows exactly which direction you're looking in, what angle. So that angle of incidence of where you're looking is passed on to the processor, and the processor generates the audio in real time. So if something is recorded with the voice coming from front of you or from behind you, it retains that information. So sound is even more realistic and more convincing in virtual reality than it has ever been. And that rides, so virtual reality rides hugely on sound. If your sound is convincing and your visual is just one room, you can still tell a story.
Yeah. And Vikas, picking up on what Chintan said, sound, and we live in India, we live in a 24/7 soundscape. It's a very noisy country for a large part of it. And then you have these, this is a very febrile country in terms of news. We have a lot of very kind of burning issues. You've got caste discrimination, you've got the broken criminal justice system, you've got inequality, you've got sanitation, you've got the foul air. And did you ever feel that, because a lot of your kind of influences in terms of what you saw in VR when you picked up sitting in India were coming in from outside, did you think that these subjects could lend themselves to powerful, immersive, very Indian storytelling, and what do you think?
I think VR, especially in Indian context, really works. So an example is the film that we made on farm suicide. And now it's tragic. We have been reading for past few years that farmers have been committing suicides because of debt. And I'm sure all of you will agree with me that it started 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it was shocking. Now it has become just, page 2, page 5, 2-column news that 6 farmers killed themselves in Vidarbha or Maharashtra. And we kind of become immune to it, right? But VR kind of allowed me as a director to wake people up. So we did a film, which is again being shown here, and the story of a daughter whose father was a farmer, and he killed himself because he had debt of just 10,000 rupees. So it was a very tragic story. Now, as a director, I had 2 options. I could have just made a video, interviewed the daughter, but we spent some time with the daughter, and she narrated her own whole story, what happened, how it happened, and based on her story, she wrote a letter to her father, things that she wanted to tell. And based on that letter, we recreated the whole story in VR. And my experience has been that out of 10 people, 9 people have taken headset off, crying, saying, why is government not doing anything about it? So that, because of VR, that 2-column news on page 4, I've been able to make people think that it is a tragedy and people need to do something about it. So India is full of such stories, and that's where VR lends itself very well to the kind of stories, some of the stories that you mentioned, to wake people up.
And Tim, what's your experience about, having worked in immersive storytelling? How much do audiences really care? When I put it in the context of journalism, and you see obviously it's up against a lot of good things, like if you take investigative journalism, for example, good old legacy investigative journalism, New York Times doing the Weinstein expose, or the Washington Post going after Trump, and so there's a very high bar in terms of a lot of the legacy journalism which is being done, and people do care about it, as we've seen. How much do people, in your experience, care about immersive storytelling when it comes to journalism?
A lot more. So I think the best example for this is a filmmaker called Garbo Aurora. He started off at the UN as the UN's kind of chief creative director, and very early on, maybe 5 years ago, he made a film called Clouds Over Sidra, which was very successful. It did all of the festival circuits. He took it to Davos, which was why they made it originally, was to take it to Davos to try and convince world leaders to make change. It's a film about a young girl in a Syrian refugee camp. But soon after, UNICEF wanted to start using it as a fundraising tool. And so he does this presentation where he talks about when the UN or UNICEF used to put out a video about an issue, say Syrian refugee camps. They would maybe get 3,000 hits, and that would convert to maybe 5% people clicking through to donate, to make a donation. Then you put Gwyneth Paltrow, you put a celebrity on, you put Angelina Jolie on the front of that video. Suddenly you get hundreds of thousands of hits. But again, you're maybe getting 10% of people clicking through to actually donate to the charity and take action. So UNICEF used this film, Clouds Over Sidra, and sent it out on the streets in a big way, like all over the UK and the US, to start using it as a fundraising tool. And they found that after people had watched the VR film, the percentage of people donating after that increased to some 60% of people would then part with money and donate to that issue. So I think that's a really good illustrator of how powerful it can be to really experience something. It's not so much about storytelling people anymore with VR, it's more like story living, story doing, because it connects you into that space in your brain where you really feel like you've been there.
And Chintan, when your friends and the people that you showed the first VR films that you were associated with, what was the reaction like? Like, did they think that it was too esoteric, or they kind of thought it was very powerful, or did they care about it?
Most of the responses have been definitely one thing. It's convinced. I mean, people who had heard about virtual reality, who've spoken to me about, oh, what do you do? Oh, I work with virtual reality a bit. Oh, okay. But once they've seen the film, they want one. They want a headset. They want more of are there more titles available? Are there more stories available? So that's been one thing. Especially old people who above the age of 60 or 70. For them, it's a wow beyond words. For them, it's an experience they could have never imagined that they would probably see in their lifetimes of being somewhere. I guess it also, so this one of the films that we had done was the Kumbh film. So we went and shot at the Kumbh Mela earlier this year. So that film, it's very difficult for a lot of people to go there to kind of, it's a huge, expansive setup. I would have never imagined I would land up there, but thanks to like a little push from the BBC, I took the opportunity. That film, after watching, and my mum saw it, she made her friends watch it, then those friends have sent that link out to their families. People are watching it over YouTube, people are watching it, if they don't have headsets, they're just like going on YouTube, putting it on full screen and swiping through it. So in that respect, it's always been, oh, I hadn't, the common expression I think is, oh, I didn't know this was possible, or I didn't know that I would react to it like this, which is what we keep telling people. Like my early days with virtual reality, a lot of it was gaming. Early days was all about gaming. Okay, man, have you experienced this game? One of the best experiences on when you put on a headset, when you get on the Oculus or you get on the mainstream headsets, is the NASA spacewalk.
Yeah.
Wow, you can feel the weightlessness. You will feel it because your brain will get tricked into feeling that. It's real. Like the way we can fool our brain. Our brains are being fooled by advertising people, by marketing people, by this thing called experiential marketing. You would have heard. Like everything is about experiential marketing, putting you in there, making you feel like that. This is the real deal. I mean, what you're seeing out there is just the spiel, and this is the real deal where the experience really happens.
So Vikas, taking off from what Chintan was saying, that if it's such a visceral experience and it kind of cuts across demographics, which makes it a unique medium, because we say digital is for youngsters, legacy is for older demographic. Now this is something which is cutting across all demographic from like 16 to 80 or whatever. Why have Indian media houses being so slow in investing in this format, which in a country like India with so many stories could have been so powerful? What do you think?
I think one of the factors is because to experience VR fully, you need headsets, and now headsets have become a lot cheaper. You can buy them from 400 rupees to 20,000 rupees in varying degree. The other thing is, I think we as media houses in India are quite risk averse. We took to digital video much later than rest of the world. We took to websites much later than the world. So it will come, and I think once there are more films being made from India and they're traveling to film festivals, I hope editors will wake up, and this is a great medium to tell stories. And risk-taking will increase in newsrooms. I've already spoken to a lot of people in different media houses who have shown interest, and they've asked me a question, how do we do it if we want to do it? The other challenge is really of education. So I really hope a lot of you who are sitting here will go and watch those films and be inspired to make VR films and ask how to do it. And it's not difficult, because when I started, I knew very little. But I just asked around, looked up on the internet, and we have made so many films.
Yeah, so do you think that they should be looking at VR and they should be trying to self-educate themselves in a way that...
It's simple now. There are cameras that are just 6,000 rupees. So if you want to make a good 360 film, you can. You don't need huge budgets. And India's a place full of stories in your neighborhood, around you. And just understanding what kind of stories work. As I mentioned the first story about those two little girls. If there's a story around in your neighborhood where you want somebody sitting in Delhi to experience it, what life is like in a Jaipur lane and what difficulties you face, you can do it through VR. So it's up to, I think, this generation to take up and go to editors and say, I want to do this. I remember our conversation when I walked up to you first and said, I want to do this. And people knew very little, including myself, but we had faith and we did it. So it will change. It will take time in India, but it will come. That's my belief.
And the last question to you, Tim, is, this is one thing I always wanted to know is, do you think it will kind of remain a kind of vanity project on the cutting edge of creativity? Because there's this thing about virtual reality is a self-contradicting medium, because it's at once an empathy machine but also an isolation machine, because the nature of the VR experiences, it kind of draws you in and viewers get isolated from other people. I agree that people said the same thing about television, and people said the same thing about the internet, about empathy and isolation together, and this is empathy into X. So what do you think the future holds in terms of this?
That's a good question. Books are probably the most solitary individual experience that you can have. It transports you to another world, and it's just you and the pages. So I don't hold much. I don't think there's much truck in the argument that it's because it's a solitary experience, then people really want communal experiences. With it being a vanity project, yes, it's one of the biggest problems facing the industry right now, especially working on the international film circuit and curating these exhibitions. It's the same few people that we see all the time, and I'd just like to add to Vikas's point that there is huge curiosity for stories from India, and there's very little content currently out there. There's also just a lack of content globally anyway, so people are really on the lookout for stories, and especially stories from places that don't get much exposure in the VR kind of circuit. But absolutely what needs to happen is for festivals and events to really open up their spaces to people that aren't just delegates, so that public can have a real chance to engage. I think the best way we're going to see that is through properly curated VR arcades where people will go to experience different programs of different work and other stories, because I don't think we're quite at the stage yet where people are going to be going out and buying headsets to experience this content in their homes. They're still a little bit too expensive, and they're a little bit too technically challenged, shall we say. They can be a real pain, and also there isn't enough content. We need more content.
Yeah, but Chintan, coming to you, just taking off from what Tim said, do you think there's a very strong case now for us, we've seen mobile phone prices have been going down, technology prices have been going down. VR, people who make the technology behind VR need to actually now look at mass producing stuff to bring down prices, because it's such a powerful medium, and if more people need to see these things, then
that's kind of happening as we speak. I mean, an average, like a cheap budget phone on Android carries, as long as it has the third camera, the second camera, which is the RGB sensor, it can support, it already supports, Google has something called the AR core, Apple is just developing a lot of, so there's another side to it, I think, which we haven't touched, which is augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality. So there are various flavors of virtual reality. Virtual reality could be an entirely made up environment. It could be shot with a 360 camera. You have 180 virtual reality now, which is 180, so you don't need it. You can just watch it off on regular TV screen. You already have extra 2:1 widescreen TVs. You have curved TVs. So the technology, the people behind the technology are finding various piggyback routes to kind of get this technology to you. That's happening as we speak, and it will get. Virtual reality need not just be experienced through a proprietary headset, and that's changing rapidly. We are looking at curved screens coming up. There are projectors which can do dome projections. So a lot of it is in the store. We're just in the infancy of this technology in terms of its, not in terms of its development. In development, it's become quite mature to the extent that it can sustain itself and it can build on itself. As its implementation, it's still just about in its infancy, getting into its teenage, getting more and more omnipresent. Like, you don't have to really look because it's already there around you. Google Maps is now using augmented reality to pinpoint your location. So we're going to see it it'll be all around very soon. Mobile phones are making the difference. 12,000 rupees, 8,000 rupees, and along with that 400 rupee headset, you already have a virtual reality experience kit, so to say. Content-wise, yes. Did we know that Daler Mehndi had done a virtual reality video?
Really?
Daler Mehndi has a Punjabi virtual reality video shot on his rooftop. So there you can actually hang out with Daler Mehndi and his friends and dance with him and see him dancing, and he's still wearing his shiny achkan with his with just regular slippers. So stuff like that. There's some really cool things going on there. Yeah. I know Rahman Studio is doing some crazy VR experimentation. We know that Subhash Gai's academy is running. They have a team, dedicated team. We know BBC is doing some innovation stuff and funding it and provoking thought processes. Yes, I mean...
so the future looks bright.
Yeah. In fact, there's another side of virtual reality, which is training, which is off-site training, like flight simulators. So flight simulators is one thing which we've used virtual reality for already. But now you have machine simulators. So it could be a plant machinery operating like a large-size machine. You can't take people for training there. It's expensive. So we put the entire experience onto a virtual reality headset and we train people. So before they hit the machines, they're already aware. So there's a lot of applications.
Okay, thanks. I think we're at the end of it, and I would like to throw it open to questions. Anybody has questions for the panel?
So my question is to Chintan sir, and that's...
We can hear.
You can hear. Yeah.
My question is to Chintan sir and Vikas sir. So you spoke about how VR headsets are cheap and mobile phones are cheap. For example, I come from a journalism classroom where we already have immersive journalism as one of our courses. So out of 27, only 15 people have premium phones which support VR. So when you speak about the entertainment part of it, I really appreciate the way it has been taking steps towards virtualizing the entire world we live in. But then when you speak about journalism at the core and root values, I think it still caters to an elitist India, because 70% of India, around 800 million people, still live in villages. And even though they're connected on internet, on Geo, using the Geo mobile phones, I don't think VR has still penetrated that area. So what do you think the scope of VR or AR? AR needs a much more premium phone than VR needs. So what do you think the scope is in India?
I'll just answer it very simply. It's well before you were born, TV sets were quite expensive in 80s. And you know how news was done? There were a bunch of people who will record news bulletins on VHS tapes and they will go and give it to bungalows. The next day they will pick up those tapes, give a new one and erase it. So that's how TV news started in India. When did it become popular? Much later. Similar, if you remember, you won't remember, but in 2003-04 we used to carry those really big bulky phones. Did we think in 8 years time we'll be doing our entire life carrying in our pocket in these headphones. So yes, it's an emerging medium, it's new, things are being developed, and that's why these kind of sessions are important. If you get excited tomorrow, you go and make a film, buy a cheap headset, show it to your friends and family, you will end up inspiring a couple of more people. So that's how technology rolls. It goes step by step. So we have come this far. When we started, our cameras were like a mess. We would use tiny GoPro cameras and make a rig out of it, just to keep it very simple. Now we have fully fledged cameras that shoot 360, and all this has happened within 3 years. So we're not talking about 15 years ago. All this has happened past 4 to 5 years. So I think your question will change if we meet again in next 3-4 years. It will be way more mass. Soutik, any more questions?
Hello, sir. My name is Neetu, and actually I have 2 questions, if I'm allowed to ask that. So my first question is, I wanted to ask, as you said, you heard about the story of those 2 girls, and you felt that this is something different. Being a filmmaker, how do you feel that this story is different and people will like it? Not necessarily the way you perceive the story. I would also perceive the story, oh, this is like very heart-touching, or maybe I really like this story. So what is the difference which makes all of you feel that this is something different and we can go forward with this? Like, what is that one thing?
Do you want to take this down?
I mean, really, it's about authorship. I mean, you can argue the similar thing, like maybe is this a long-form piece? Is this just a tweet? Is this an online video? Is this a documentary? Or is this VR? And the author has to make that call. And but the things that would make me think that it would be a story that's in virtual reality are perhaps you've got a real lead character that you feel like somebody could really benefit from being close to, getting to know, getting into their space, really transporting that the audience into that character's world. Like, that's what VR is very good at. Just in your Kum film, there's the 2 grannies that go to Kum Mela, and you're really immersed in the kind of experience in their world while they're there. You're inside their tent watching how they eat, and you're going to meet the guru? Yeah, you're going to meet the guru with them, and so I think those are things that really...
Yeah, I think he's right. I think what we need to do is newsrooms in India have operated in silos. You have the legacy newsrooms, which are very strong silos of print, and they believe that how they look at a story is how the story should be. You have TV newsrooms who look at stories in a different way, and this is a story made for TV, and that's how we look at it. But I think we need to have holistic newsrooms where we have started doing that in the BBC now, where they come in and we decide, and it's a really strong story, and all the print has a claim on it, the video people have a claim on it, and we might say, look, I think the most powerful form of storytelling from this subject could be in VR.
And it shouldn't just be, you don't have to just make it in VR. It can be a completely multimedia offering. If it's a great story, then you should have a thing in print. You should have the VR film. You should maybe have some clips of that VR film also as a short digital kind of online video. Like, there's several different ways that you can tell that story and give different angles to it.
That would be the ideal, really, yeah.
I'd like to add just one thing. There's something called, which Vikas pointed out when we started working on these films, especially the Kumbh film, is everybody wants to go and see the Kumbh. Like, how do you make them relate to it? So the key phrase here for me was human interest. Anything that's got human interest, anything that you can relate with, will make a great film. So, I mean, if there is a character that you can make relatable, because that eventually the viewer is going to become that character, and the viewer has to have that one-on-one relationship with that character. So once that clicks, I think you've got a good story start. Like.
And is there any way we can connect with for any other story? Is there any way we can connect with you people?
Yeah, sure.
If we have stories, like.
We all are on social media, so hit us up there, Twitter, Facebook. But first, I would say whoever is interested to go and experience these films, it will give you an idea what kind of stories.
Look at these films,
Yeah. So have a look and hit us up on social.
Yes.
My name is Advait, and my question, I'm isolating it just to the VR experience. So I'll lead with an example. Now, if I have a bucket list which involves me touring Italy, but one of you guys have already made a film about it, let's say. So in essence, if it is so immersive, I wouldn't be bothered to actually go there because I have experienced what I want to. So doesn't it, at the end of the day, make it not a very, it reduces human interaction as such, because all that I want to see is being delivered to me right here. So my interaction with the world, which is actual reality, sort of diminishes.
It's already happening. You're looking at your phone all the time. So,
But I could flip the argument around and say that if you watch something like The Comb on VR, you would actually be propelled to go and have a look at itself. So it kind of kindles a certain interest. So it could happen the other way. You know, you can actually do some great tourism stuff in VR and actually propel people to go or incentivize them to go to those places.
I would rather make you watch in VR because it reduces the carbon footprint, the planet lives longer and all that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for everything and for being there. You can all watch the 3 films that are being shown in, what's the place? At Madhya. And thank you, Chintan, thank you, Vikas, and thank you to him for coming. And hopefully, you'll be more interested in immersive storytelling from now on. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I would like to invite Rahul Dev, sir, and Kiruba for a thanks. Please. Kiruba. बेटा खीरुबा को दे दो खीरुबा
Citylive, a platform to sharing your thoughts.